All right, thanks, Craig. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to, as Craig said, Awake for the Walking Dead. I'll introduce myself in a second, but I first just wanted to give a little brief introduction as to why we're doing this, as the 11-season strong series has come to an end, and it has been a landmark series and a big part of my life. Myself and Stacey really wanted to do something to mark the occasion, so I apologise now for excessive nerdiness or any potential tears that may spontaneously occur. So we're going to start with introducing the panel, and we'll introduce ourselves and why we came to The Walking Dead, or how we came to The Walking Dead. So I'm Dr. Stella Gaynor. I'm a senior lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University, and I was introduced to The Walking Dead around 2007-2008 when I was in Forbidden Planet in Manchester, which is a comic book store, and the guy behind the counter suggested I try The Walking Dead. He was, of course, correct. I did love it. And then when the series started, I watched it in the UK as soon as I could. And then those of you that know me, or seen me present, or even spoke to me, or even just happened across me on social media, know that my PhD was based on The Walking Dead and what came thereafter. So there's my little life story. So I'll hand over to Stacey. This is Stacey.
Thank you, Stella. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be running this event, or to be running this event with Fair 2000 with Stella and the brilliant panel we have set up tonight. My little bio is I'm Professor Stacey Abbott. I've written extensively about vampires and zombies. So when The Walking Dead turned up on television, it seemed like a natural thing for me to obsess over. It also started in 2010 when Lorna Jara and I were just in the process of finishing our book on TV horror, and the show turned up, so we immediately started watching it and managed to get the first season in the book. So at least it is there and we get to talk about it, but only a teaser. And then I've subsequently written about it in my book Undead Apocalypse, for obvious reasons, as the title kind of gives away. But I've also written about it in relation to horror and grief, and the way in which horror often creates a space that allows us to process grief. I think The Walking Dead does that in spades. So that's my little biography. I'd like to invite our panel to turn their cameras on, and I'm just going to arbitrarily pick people to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Bethan Jones and see if Bethan would like to introduce herself to the group.
Hello. My name is Bethan Jones. That was my cat Loki, who will be interrupting us again throughout the evening. I'm a research associate at the University of York, but my academic work really focuses on fandom, which is where my interest for The Walking Dead comes in, really. It's kind of weird because I wouldn't describe myself as a horror fan, and when I first started watching The Walking Dead, I'd have to record it on my DVR, then watch it at like 6 o'clock the following day while I was eating my tea, so that if there was anything really scary or something gory, I could just like not look, which is not the way I watch The Walking Dead now. But I've written about sort of anti-fandom in relation to The Walking Dead, fan tourism, and I've recently just had an essay on the show published as part of the Museum of the Moving Image in New York's AMC Walking Dead exhibition.
Thank you. Can we leap to Catherine?
Hi. So I feel like my bio. I did my PhD in horror at the University of Essex. I've written on The Walking Dead in terms of Darren and Carol. I've done case studies on them. Weaponized Walkers. I've co-authored a paper with Nikki Foster-Kruchek on post-apocalyptic trauma. And we're currently working on doing some research for some work on disability within the series. But I came to The Walking Dead mostly because someone showed me a photo of Daryl and I went, oh, nice man with crossbow. Okay, yes, I will check this out. And then what I actually fell in love with in the series is the fact that it is actually a post-apocalyptic text. I was so sick of origin stories because they're all, by necessity, they're all kind of the same. So actually, I was really interested in seeing something of how people survive after the event rather than during the event. And that's what really made me enjoy the series.
Thank you. And last but not least, Simon Brown.
Hi, yes. So I'm Associate Professor of Film and TV at Kingston University. I came to The Walking Dead via a very unusual route, which was Frank Darabont, ironically enough. Being a Stephen King scholar, this was a TV series from the director of The Mist in particular. And I thought, oh, well, Frank Darabont does TV. That's going to be interesting. So I watched the first season, which I enjoyed. And I realized I was listening to everybody talking, and I realized I've never seen the last episode of the first season. I've seen all of the others, never seen the last episode of the first season, so I've no idea what actually happened when they got to Atlanta. And I'm really approaching this. I've not written on the show, but obviously I have an interest in adaptation, particularly in relation to television, and this idea of the relationship between the original source text and the adaptation over an extended period of time. So I'm kind of here a little bit to talk about that, but also here, I guess, maybe as somebody who just watched the show for a very long time, and was invested in it, but sort of also kind of stood a little bit away from it, and just kind of, it was one of those shows that you watched, and I enjoyed that. And so I guess I'm here as a kind of counterbalance to Stella's fandom. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, okay. Well, if you can all mute yourselves, I could get going. All right, so it's lots of different angles coming in on this, I feel. I think we should start with the finale, with the final episode. So just to reiterate again, spoilers, so if you've not seen the final episode, watch the recording later and come back. But I would like to ask everybody, what were your initial thoughts on the final episode? Was it good? Was it bad? Are you feeling indifferent towards it? Did you enjoy it? Did you cry? What were the highlights? What were the lowlights? How do you feel about it? For my own personal opinion quickly is, I did enjoy the final episode, but I feel like it needs a few watches for me to get what actually happened, because I spent most of it, like I said, blubbing all the way through it. But one thing that I did particularly enjoy in the final episode was the echoes to Rick in the hospital in the very first episode, and putting the bed in front of Judith's door so that the walkers couldn't get in. And I liked that mirroring from the very first time we saw anybody dealing with this, with the apocalypse nonsense, to our final moments with our cast of The Walking Dead. So that was one of my highlights. Obviously there are some lowlights that we'll get to, but yeah, over to you guys. So back to you, Simon, as someone who's not wearing a Walking Dead t-shirt. What was your favorite bits of the episode?
I liked, actually, one of the things that struck me about the episode is I was ready for big kind of deaths and big sort of emotional kind of stuff, and I kind of liked the fact that it ended on a relatively low-key and positive note. You had the big explosion-y bit, and then you had sort of you had a couple of deaths at the beginning and then one towards the end. But I came away from it very much with a sense of comfort and relief from it. It was a very quiet end to a show that has shown itself capable of doing some quite extraordinary and unpleasant things. And I sort of liked that. I think that was a strength. There was also a little bit of, the flip side of that is you could also say that was a weakness, because clearly, as the end of a show that's been running for 11 years, it was sort of taking a backseat towards setting up the ones that are coming. And I wonder whether there was too much of a trade-off of allowing that to happen and not necessarily giving us the ending to this particular version. But yeah, I kind of enjoyed how comfortable it made me feel. It was sad, but in a sort of like so long kind of way, as opposed to a kind of tragic goodbye kind of way. That was my takeaway from it more than anything, as a starting point.
Yeah. Stacey?
Well, I, like you, also really like the echoes of Rick from the first episode, but I also liked the fact that there were a lot of zombies in this episode. Like, I was really pleased to see that, you know, that the zombies really came back in literally in full force, which, as you know, when you're watching a series, I mean, you can't have the same number of zombies in every episode. A, it's just too expensive, and B, it would get boring if you just had hordes every week. But I thought that was really nice that it kind of had these nods to key elements of the series. So someone gets their hand chopped off, and someone gets bitten by the zombies, and you know, we're kind of reminded that even in a world where they are building a new future, and the big part of the episode and the end of the series is about this new future, but it's saying that this is still a threat, this is still the reality. And I really like that, and it had lots of good gory effects. And I just thought, you know, this is one of the many reasons I like The Walking Dead, is I enjoy the body horror of that. So I was really pleased to see that they remembered that, alongside doing the kind of goodbyes and the nice moments about saying there is a future. And I think they got a fairly good balance between the horror and the future.
Yeah, I agree. Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much echoing what you've all said. I love the references back, and across the whole second half of that season as well, having the references back. I did like that they always do very big theatrical dramatic moments very well. They do very quiet, intimate, emotional moments very well, and I'm glad that we got a few of each. One of the things I didn't like about the very end is it did do a little bit of a Lord of the Rings and just have an ending. Oh, okay, that's the end, and then an ending. No, that's the end. Okay, now, and that was a little bit jarring, I found. But that's more personal opinion, I think, than anything. It was just like, oh, okay, we fit. No, okay, fine. But I did like that the very final image was of the children of the future and looking out onto everything. It was, I think they were, as Simon was saying, they were right to kind of end it quite quietly and peacefully. But you have enough potential drama seeded in. You know, we have these new variants. We don't know what Maggie said to Daryl to send that he's gone. So there's enough kind of setting up without it interfering with the end of that series. But I just felt very strange and deflated at the end, to be honest. But I think that might just be end of season, end of series. I think a lot of people feel that. It's just like, oh, we're done. Okay. But I was expecting more deaths, I must admit.
Yeah, end of season blues, I think might be a thing, because we got it Monday in the UK, wasn't it? And I didn't watch it until Friday, and I had plenty of time to watch it before then, but I kept putting it off because if I watched it, that meant it was done. So I put it off until Friday, and it was like, no, come on, you got this on Monday, like probably watch it. Bethan, what's your views on the final episode?
I did a really stupid thing and watched it early before I went to work. So I went to work with just like puffy eyes and had like a 10 o'clock meeting and was just like, I'm fine. I think I'm satisfied with it. Like I wasn't sure what to expect going in, because like everyone said, The Walking Dead is really good at sort of surprising you with these big moments and these big character deaths. And I was expecting more main characters to die than what we had. And I was fully expecting Aaron to die, and I love Ross Marquand, and I would have been gutted if he had. So that was a bit, yeah. I feel like I've come to terms with it, and I love the interplay between Daryl and Carol. Like, they're my favourites, and I watched the episode again literally just before this started, and as soon as it came to them sitting by the lake, I was gone. And I loved that. That's probably my favourite part. I didn't like the Rick Michonne stuff at the end. I felt like it turned the episode too much into a trailer for their series in particular. And for me, it would have been better to have it end with that shot of Daryl kind of riding along beside the lake, because to me, that was the ending of the series. And it would have been better if we'd had that kind of epilogue as a longer trailer for Rick and Michonne, especially because, you know, they did the sort of flashbacks and looking back at like Abraham and various characters from the early seasons. And I think if we'd had a bit of distance, then Rosita being in there would have been more impactful rather than it coming sort of right at the end. So on the whole, I'm satisfied with it. And I think it works as an ending, particularly when you think of some of the series we've had that haven't had a chance to come to, you know, a conclusion as such because they've been cancelled sort of, you know, mid-season or whatever. But yeah, some nitpicks, but on the whole, I think I'm satisfied.
Okay, I have one more question about the finale before I'll hand over to Stacey to throw out some more questions. Should Maggie have shot Pamela? Yeah, good, right. I just thought it was a terrible person. I was like, kill her, but she didn't. She put the gun down. Never mind. All right then, Stacey, I'll let you ask some more reasonable questions.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great question, actually. I guess I just want to before we move on to think about the series more broadly. I think I wanted to pull out a bit more about the finale because I think we've all raised some really interesting things, and I guess I agree with Bethan about the ending with the Rick Michonne. I mean, I really felt I want Rick in there somewhere, but I think it just felt not quite right. He couldn't just turn up randomly in the Commonwealth, but I think a trailer would have been better. But I wonder how people feel about the way in which this episode was setting up the franchise. It's an end of things, but did it feel forced in terms of how it was setting up, and how do we feel about it being used to set up franchises like the next series of shows? So it's finishing, but it's not finishing. So I wondered what people's take on that side of things were. So I'm just going to randomly mix things up, and actually I'm going to start with Catherine.
Oh no. Yeah, I completely agree about Rick and Michonne. It was very, very jarring. I personally thought what they were going to do is finish on those nice quiet kind of Daryl and Carol. I'm saying Bethan, I was gone at that moment, and then, you know, I say the kids looking out. I think if they had done that and then credits and then an extended trailer, or even just that as it came, I think it would have been a lot better, because then you are putting that final line on, this is where it is, this is what we're going to. Like I said before, I think they seeded it in fairly well, I think, especially because we are set up to, you know, so Maggie and Negan, we are set up to believe, we know that they're going to be in a series together, so we kind of expect that last conversation with them to end a little differently, and they surprised. I thought they were going to go for a kind of a different kind of ending on that, and I'm glad that they left it on this very uneasy sort of, okay, I accept this, but I don't trust you, I don't like you, because now I want to know how they get to the next bit. But I do kind of wish they'd just left it alone. It was a very special thing. It did something new, and then it had its horrible moments and then came back again, and I don't know. I'm cautious about the new series. As much as I like the world of it, I'm very cautious about what they're going to do.
Thank you. Simon, do you have thoughts on the kind of move into new franchises?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of extended universes. Generally, I think it's a new thing. Spin-offs are one thing, you know, obviously Angel was a very good show. Spin-offs are one thing. I hate this kind of world building and spinning off like 6 different characters into different shows, because I think I agree with Catherine. This was a thing. It was good. Now it's over. If there was no more of this, I would be fine. You know, and going back to your earlier question about how it ended, I think, you know, I put myself in the position of going, well, if I never watched any more of this, I would be very satisfied with the idea of seeing Daryl ride off on his motorcycle into the sunset. You know, he is Ethan Hunt. No, Ethan, whatever the hell his surname is from the searchers. Ethan Edwards. There we go. Not Ethan Hunt. Well, he is a bit Ethan Hunt. You know, he's Ethan Edwards from the searchers. He doesn't belong in the civilized world. Not really. I'd be happy with that. And Maggie and Negan, that's a perfect roundup to their story. I can't forgive you. I don't, you know, given given that history, I think that's a really nice way to end it. So I don't mind that there are franchises starting up. I'm not necessarily going to watch them, but I see those endings as being both things. A kind of, if there was no more, if they got cancelled tomorrow, that would be a good way to end it. Excuse me. The Rick and Michonne thing is obviously very, very different, and I think much more jarring and problematic from my perspective. I saw that as very much bringing, but I get why they did it, but it seemed to me to be bringing back two characters who had gone, and I didn't miss really. By the time the show ended, I was okay with not seeing them anymore. So yeah, a bit of both, I think, on that one.
Fair enough. Thank you. Bethan, any thoughts?
In theory, I haven't got a problem with like the spin-offs. In practice, I've never watched spin-offs for any show that I love. So with the X-Files, I've never seen The Lone Gunmen, I've never seen Millennium. I haven't seen, that's a lie, I've seen a couple of episodes of Fear the Walking Dead and wasn't that bothered, so never kept up with it. Never seen any of the episodes of Tales Beyond. And I think it's Tales Beyond that there's sort of a crossover with Rick's scene at the end of the finale. And I'm like, I have no idea what this is. I do not know the context for this. I should probably watch Tales Beyond to see why he's standing in mud with a city in front of him. And it just jarred, like that ending jarred me. Like Simon, the Daryl ending that worked, the Maggie and Negan ending that worked. You know, those, we know that there are spin-offs, we know something's going to happen with them, but we didn't need to be spoon-fed. And it kind of felt a bit like, I don't know, maybe a sort of cynical marketing ploy to get viewers sort of, you know, geared up to watch the Rick spin-off, when I don't think it served the storytelling. So I mean, I'll probably watch the spin-offs. I'll probably watch the Daryl spin-off because, you know, it's Daryl. But yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sort of not sure about how they were set up or how they're gonna work.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'll jump to you in a second. So my one comment though, the one thing I did like about the Rick bit at the end were squishy zombies in the mud. Like, I was really like, I'm good with squishy zombies in the mud. Like, that was a great moment. So that's my contribution there. Stella, how about you?
Well, all of my work on The Walking Dead has been from an industrial perspective. So all the industrial motives and reasons and strategies for making it in the first place, and, you know, putting it globally wherever it wants to be, and all that kinds of thing. So in terms of how they set up the spin-offs or future series or franchising or world building or however they want to be calling it, we've known for a few years that that's been the plan, and AMC have been quite open about the fact that they wanted to franchise it. And they did say pre-COVID that they wanted to do some films. So there was going to be, we knew Rick was going to go, and then they were like, well, Rick will have a film. So I think I was more excited about a one-off feature length with Rick and explaining the helicopter and all that kind of stuff. I think I was more excited about that. The other thing that I think it kind of ties into, and it's, you know, a point that I was probably going to bring up later on, is it's with the TV landscape going the way that it has been going, it's becoming increasingly difficult to untangle film from television. And the big thing that film does now, certainly big mainstream Hollywood blockbuster film, is build these huge worlds. Look at Marvel and DC and Star Wars, I suppose. But it's I think it's just part of that current system of this is what we do, and this is how we keep loyalty in fans. We keep people here when everybody has so much choice, and whether it's needed or not. Because what you said there, Simon, was really interesting, that when Rick did go, I was sad and I was gutted. I didn't want him to leave, and then I didn't want Michonne to go. But you're absolutely right. By the time we've got to when I watched it on Friday and they came back, I realised, I've not really been missing them. Do I need this? I'm not sure that I do. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's part of the wider industrial strategies, and yeah, 2-3 years ago, I'd have been like, yay, more stuff with Rick in it. But now, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I feel the same way as much as and I think if you had asked me before seeing it if I wanted Rick back, I was like, yeah, I want to see Rick. But I realized what I want is to see Rick with Daryl and Carol, and I want to see those. I love Michonne, and I actually like their relationship, but actually just setting up them meeting together isn't really what I want. I really actually, it's more the original group, and that's not, you know, that's not going to happen. So that's fine. In a way, I suddenly went, I don't need this. But I agree with everything that's been said, is that I think that it's you know, I think they got, for the most part, a balance between hinting at this extended universe, as you say, Stella, it's just the way it's going to be, but not it completely taking away. Simon's put his hand up. So Simon.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to do that. I think one of the things that's quite interesting, just on the back of what Stella said, is, of course, you know, in the States, this is AMC. And I completely get that idea of, oh yeah, we want to keep people here, you know, we want to give them something. What's interesting looking at it from a UK perspective is the scattered nature of The Walking Dead here. You know, it was on Fox, and very much when it was on Fox, it was part of that Fox community of shows that I would watch there. American Horror Story was on Fox. It was part of a unified thing, I think. And then it was weird because Fear the Walking Dead turned up on BT TV. So I never watched that because I didn't get BT TV because you had to pay for it. And I've no idea where the other one turned up at all.
On Amazon, so, I think.
Huh?
On Amazon.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
So this idea of kind of not so much brand loyalty, but station loyalty or platform loyalty, which I totally get. It seems much more spurious from a UK perspective, and that's also connected to the fact that The Walking Dead, you know, regardless of what you think of it, is on Disney, which is the home of universe building, blah de blah. I don't know. There's something there in that that kind of fractured nature of the brand, of the branding of the viewing experience here. So
yeah. Bethan.
Yeah, I feel like we're sort of moving into some of like the next questions that we had, but Stella's point and what Simon has just said as well about sort of world building, interestingly, there's been a really recent report, sorry, the cat is okay, it's fine, and there's been a recent report about, I think it's Marvel fans kind of getting overwhelmed with all of this content and all of these spin-offs and stuff, and it's really interesting that that's seems to be the way it's going with films, and particularly with like big franchises. But is that necessarily what the audience wants? And is it going to backfire? And then is a similar thing going to happen with The Walking Dead, particularly with sort of fans' responses and critiques over the last few seasons? But yeah, I thought that was interesting, just kind of following on from what Stella and Simon were saying.
Yeah, it's I guess time will tell. I mean, you know, some of you said, you know, I'm probably not going to watch it. I think I'll intend to watch it. How far I get through it, I don't know, because like you said, it's not the old group, is it? So am I going to care? We'll see. So I think we should to move the discussion on a little bit and to consider The Walking Dead more as its legacy in terms of TV landscape, TV horror, what it's done, you know, for the rest of TV. You know, and obviously I wrote a book about it, so you should all go and read that. But it's quite clear that The Walking Dead did set off a chain reaction of serialized TV horror, which we've all enjoyed, and maybe that's kind of, you know, petered off a little bit now. But in terms of AMC and The Walking Dead as as sort of partners, or AMC making The Walking Dead has left a legacy with AMC because AMC realized they've got their horror audience, and so they then went on to do Shudder, and they brought Nicotero over from The Walking Dead to do Creepshow. So you can see a clear legacy and lineage just going on inside AMC with what The Walking Dead has done for them, on top of what I imagine millions and millions of dollars that The Walking Dead has brought in. But I'd be interested in what the rest of the panel think about think about those kinds of things, like what has The Walking Dead done for TV landscape, for TV horror, and how what's happened over the past 12 years that it's that it's been on. So don't know, does anybody want to volunteer, or shall I pick on you like we're in class?
I'll go first. I don't mind. I think the legacy of The Walking Dead's really kind of interesting. I mean, you know, the famous story was that Romero always said he didn't want to have anything. George Romero didn't want to have anything to do with it because it was a soap opera with zombies. And if you look at it from one perspective, over 11 years and the longevity of it, in many ways, that's exactly what it was. And I think that's one of its strengths, to be perfectly honest with you. And I mean, I'm assuming that we're going to talk about villains at some point, so I don't want to kind of belay that. But going back to what Stacey said, it was nice that the last episode was actually about zombies, who are very much kind of in the background for a lot of it. But I think, you know, it precipitated, it broke down the barriers of what you could represent. You know, very much so, and not in the way that, say, Masters of Horror did, which really kind of pushed the envelope of what was acceptable. I think the great thing about The Walking Dead is that they did it every week. You know, every week you get some kind of gloppy looking shambling thing, and not just Daryl kind of coming through. But it would do it all the time. And I think one of the things that's interesting for me, kind of sitting now and looking at this very changed TV landscape of streaming services and whatnot, is outside of, if you take away the sort of Netflix platforms and some of the stuff there, I think The Walking Dead, to a certain extent, still stands on its own. There isn't a huge amount on network/cable television really that's doing what it did in terms of imagery. And I think that's kind of a testament to it. In the end, it sort of stamped its own territory and took it, and it owned it. And I think in that regards, its longevity makes sense, but it's also kind of surprising to me that we didn't see more kind of shows sort of doing what it did. That's my thought to get this conversation going, I think.
Okay, somebody else want to jump in?
I'll jump in here. Just because, I mean, I was thinking, and I agree with you, Simon, and yet I'm also thinking, where if you with my zombie hat on, or my zombie head on, but that just sounds really gruesome. My zombie head on. What's interesting is the ways it did open the door to, in a way, challenging that whole Romero quote, which I've used, and which is this idea that this serialized storytelling doesn't work because there aren't enough zombies. Actually, what we've seen is a whole range of these long-running series that have done really interesting things with zombies, and the whole landscape's opened up to in a way thinking about how the zombie in serialized storytelling works and is structured. So, and internationally, and I think that's really key. Is you had stuff like Z Nation and various things on American television, but then Kingdom and All of Us Are Dead, and they're just that sense of new film TV makers thinking of new ways of taking that story, that zombie narrative, and reworking it in an extended narrative. And I think that's been really good, because they're all really different, whether it's All of Us Are Dead, or we've got Last of Us coming soon, and then Santa Clarita Diet, or iZombie, really different takes, and Kingdom, which is like, wonderful it's like heritage zombies, so I think that's been really interesting to see, and how they're all used to create very different kinds of stories and different themes. And with my interest in kind of emotion and grief, and the ways in which that serial storytelling is getting us to engage with confronting mortality, death, trauma, in very interesting ways. So I think you're right. I don't think anyone, like, we're not getting the same on kind of broadcast television or even in more traditional for other formats, but on the platforms and streaming services, we are seeing people engaging with that serialization of the zombie. And that doesn't always have to mean horror. That can be horror, or that can be comedy, or that can be melodrama, or period drama. But I think that's been really interesting to see how that's developed. Those are my 2 cents there.
Bethan, do you want to chip in?
I kind of feel a bit of a fraud in this section because I don't do TV horror as such. I do the stuff around TV horror. But one thing that I find really interesting with The Walking Dead is just this transmedia universe is built up. And we see that with Marvel and DC and these kind of big, predominantly filmic productions. But I'm struggling to think of any other shows, much less zombie shows, that have, you know, the webisodes and the spin-off games, because there's at least 3 Telltale games now that I think link into the story world. And I don't know, I find the way that The Walking Dead sort of straddles multiple genres, obviously, you know, we've got the comic books that started the whole thing off, is interesting. And I wonder if and how more TV shows will start doing that, or whether it's just The Walking Dead is doing this as sort of a standalone thing, because it's drawing on some of those really cinematic experiences, you know, like with obviously Greg Nicotero and Frank Darabont came from cinema. So yeah, that's sort of my rambling thoughts on that as a non-TV horror person.
Catherine, anything to add?
Just that I think it kind of opened the rules of horror and drama quite a bit. It did make horror quite mainstream, but it's one of the early ones I can think of anyway, that you have this ensemble cast that when they leave, life continues, and no character in that universe is safe. You know, it doesn't matter if you are the main character. You know, Rick, I mean, I know he comes back, but he dies for all intents and purposes. And it will continue. There are many characters that when they went, I was, you know, how Stacey was saying earlier about, you know, you want Rick back, you want this character back or this character back. But actually, after a little while, you just kind of go with it. And I don't think that had necessarily happened. In other ones, it was kind of, if a certain character left, it either would stop or it would completely change the feel of it. And also that, you know, because it was set in a post-apocalyptic world, not a world where the infection was happening at that time. It was, you know, it did open up all these ways of looking at trauma and grief, as Stacey was saying, and the reality of living in this world where you get trauma impacted by trauma constantly. There's no respite from it. It was very different to other ones that came before, where, you know, the horror ends. It ends, and it might end on a twist with a sequel potential and the villain coming back, but it ends. And this was just, it's just how things are now. And I think that was something different that it brought to the kind of horror landscape as it at the time anyway. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Well, with that point there that you said, you know, this is the way things are now, which might be a line from the series. I feel like this is how we live now, whatever.
Probably.
I was wondering, to, you know, if that's the way things are now, how do you think that translated into how the show dealt with representation and criticism that came with that? So if it's presenting a world where this is how it is now, how do you feel like it played with anything to do with representation, diversity, or did it miss the mark sometimes?
I don't know if you're asking me specifically, but I'm going to jump in anyway.
Yes, you, sorry.
Yeah, I think it did very well in some areas and very poorly in others, like any other series. But it's something like, it's problematic because it definitely did things like, queer representation not good in the series at all. There was very much the kill your gays trope throughout the series, even in the final episodes. And if you had two gay characters or a bisexual character and a gay character, almost inevitable that they'd end up together, or at least it would be insinuated that they'd end up together. And it's not, obviously not like that in the real world. In terms of disability, pretty good representation, especially in this characters are living in this world where at any moment they can become disabled, and they just kind of have to deal with it and move on. And it becomes quite a commonplace thing. By the final couple of series, there are quite a few characters sporting life-changing injuries or disabilities, and that was something that I don't really see in other long-running series, particularly. In terms of race, though, not so much. So, which is it's a shame that I think it got better as it went on in terms of representation, but it was always going to be a bit problematic. I think most series are, but I don't know what anyone else thinks of that.
Anyone else want to chip in on that?
I'll chip in a little bit. And I agree with everything you said. And I guess in terms of race, one of the things that struck me is it was a series that was heavily criticized in the early seasons. And I'm going to quote my co-writer, Lorna Jowett, who complained about the series being about white male pain. And it was very much, and I would do her eye rolling, but I don't have the skill to eye roll like Lorna Jowett. And she was always quite right. Like, as much as I love Rick and all that, that focus, and it was very limiting. It just meant that it was his story, and then everyone else was expendable around that story. And it's one of the things that obviously I do think that there was an attempt to address that, that there was an attempt to listen to those criticisms gradually, and particularly, and again, obviously, benefited when Andrew Lincoln decided to leave, and then you could also suddenly you just destabilized that world. You didn't have him at the center, and you had to rethink, and there became much more different characters coming to the foreground. And I think is one of the benefits of the big ensemble is that at least as they tried to resolve, they never completely cracked it. And I do think there's a question of the spin-offs all being around the set white characters who survive, and that is something that is where I feel like, okay, that's disappointing that that's the route they've gone in. As much as I love those individual characters, I think that over the series, I do think as they built that ensemble, suddenly they were countering it. So it's never perfect, but at least I thought there's listening. And it is, again, it's one of those things that's great about serialized narratives is that there was listening to that part, those criticisms, and you see them trying to address it. And I think that's particularly the case when Angela Kang took over as showrunner, that she was very mindful of that. And you could really see the dynamics changing with her involvement. Catherine, did you have your hand up and you wanted to jump in again?
I did, sorry. I just had, I thought the gender dynamics of the show just completely changed as it went on. And I thought it was a nice bit to put in. But the fact that in the very early episodes, it was men hunt zombies and women do the laundry in the river. But as it went on, they became much more well-rounded. And, Daryl and Carol, I find particularly interesting in that, because at the beginning, they were very much both marginalized characters, but very much Daryl was overtly masculine and Carol was overtly feminine. And actually, as time went on, Daryl had to engage more with emotion and become, sort of more feminine, and Carol had to become more masculine and tougher and learn to fight and all this. And actually, because of engaging in these different dynamics, they became much more well-rounded characters. But also that domestication and kind of female gender roles weren't. There was some benefit espoused of it. There's that bit in season 2 where Laurie's telling off Andrea for wanting to go and hunt with the boys, and she's saying that, well, we're keeping the homestead and it's important. And on the one hand, I can't stand Andrea, so I'm very reluctant to go, yay, you want to go and subvert those dynamics, good for you, because I don't like you. But at the same time, it was actually quite nice to see them going, this is important, creating a home is important. And certainly through the first 5 seasons, you do get that story of they are just trying to find a home, and every time they find a home, it's destroyed, and then it's having to remake that and go on along and along. And I'm going to stop because I will keep just going and going. But it was a very different story the first half of the season, and that interacted much more with the gender dynamics.
Yeah, Carol's sort of character arc is one of my favourites, because she does start out as this abused woman who is quiet and meek and completely lacks confidence, and by the end she's this frigging badass, like she's awesome. And like you said, the Daryl Carol dynamic and the growth within them, I think that kind of reflects the way that gender dynamics across the 11 seasons kind of changed. And I do think, like you said Stacey, that in terms of sort of racial diversity, it definitely improves and it gets better like as the seasons go on. And I like the fact that we end with 2 Black men running a new community, and they're not embodying toxic masculinity. Like Ezekiel is a strong man, but he's not toxic, and you see that with Mercer as well, which is again why it's frustrating that we haven't got a spin-off with those 2. Like, I would love to see what they do with that community. So it is really frustrating that the spin-offs, we are seeing a majority white main cast. I think definitely sexuality is probably the worst well done. Is that a coherent sentence? Yeah, it's done the worst out of the sort of equality, diversity, inclusivity bubble. Yeah, sorry.
Excellent grammar there. Very well done. All right, Simon, do you have anything to say with regards to the representation in The Walking Dead?
Not really. I'm not that hasn't been said before. I think just adding to the gender discussion, because I get that. I feel like this is going to get, as people start to look back on the series and think about the series, I feel that this is going to get lost. I think one of the things I really liked is Samantha Morton, and bringing in Samantha Morton as the head of the Whisperers, because you had David, what's his face, as the governor. I've forgotten his name. Morrissey. Thank you very much. And then Negan, and just that titanic kind of presence of Jeffrey Dean Morgan, this very, very divisive figure, and this character, this villain that sort of stayed with it. And given how divisive and significant that character was, how do you top that? And I loved the fact that not only did they come in with the Whisperers, not only did they come in with a female antagonist, but they got one of the best actors working today to play the part. Somebody who you would never in a bazillion years expect to turn up in something like The Walking Dead. And she was breathtaking as a character and as a performer. And I really liked that dynamic. And, talking about Carol as being this great character, the idea of having a climax, which is the 2 of them going head to head, not only was it great, but it also shows how Carol, the character, and Melissa McBride, the actor, had developed over the course of these years to stand toe to toe with somebody like Samantha Morton. Yeah, that's my thing. I think I'm going to be flying the flag for the Whisperers into the future as being quite a great sort of. It had its missteps, but I thought that was a really good way to go.
Yeah, I loved the Whisperers. So before we get to talking about our favourite villains, I would like to ask Bethan about The Walking Dead and its impact on horror fan industry relations and what's going on there.
Oh my
Can you
God.
tell me how it is that I'm behaving, please?
I could talk about this for so long, seriously. So there's sort of a couple of really interesting things, I think. One is the interactions between the actors, the crew, the producers, and the fans. We see a lot of it, and we see a lot of it in different formats. So Norman Reedus, for example, is sort of really big on Instagram, and he will repost fan art and fan videos and stuff, which, you know, going back probably even 10 years ago, like that wouldn't have happened. You know, there's that divide between the fans are here and the actors are here, and you do not show them fanfic or fan art. That is not a thing that happens. Whereas now he's actively engaging and being sort of really encouraging. And Greg Nicotero had done a similar thing. There was a girl who was really, really good artist, got in touch with him on Instagram, just like, I think tagged him in one of her portfolios or something. And he ended up inviting her to one of the conventions. She's like stayed with him the whole day. He introduced her to all of these other people. I can't remember if she ended up actually sort of working with him or doing some work experience at some point. So there's that sort of that real connection. And Nicotero said several times, you know, The Walking Dead is a family. It's the fans and the cast and the crew, and we are a family. Which becomes really, really interesting when we think about sort of disagreements and criticisms, which fans had a lot of throughout the course of the series. And they were really, really vocal about it. And one of the big examples is the first episode of season 7, when we get really, really graphic violence, like horrendously graphic violence. And there were scores and scores and scores of complaints, which sort of led to the producers cutting back a bit on the violence in the sort of later parts of that season and carrying on. And again, that's not something that historically would have happened. So there is this real influence that the fandom holds over sort of the actors, the producers, to some extent, maybe AMC. But the other thing that I found really interesting, and which I've written about, and which Catherine is going to laugh at because she knows what I'm going to say, is the Walker Stalker convention, which was set up by James, I can't remember his surname, this is ridiculous, but anyway, it was set by him. He positioned himself as this big fan, and he somehow got in a position to set up these really big conventions in Atlanta, in London, Walker Stalker cruise that had like the actors coming in, and he really sort of pushed himself as what Suzanne Scott would call an auteur fanboy. But he was also involved in some sort of really sketchy business practices that completely backfired. So one of the conventions, like, he hadn't paid the actors, like there was Angel Theory, who is deaf. She wasn't given an interpreter, so a fan had to step in to interpret. He like ridiculously raised prices. There were loads and loads of issues. But because he positioned himself as a fanboy, he was able to kind of mobilize fans on social media to support him and attack other fans. So there was this really sort of interesting, Derek Johnson calls it fantagonism, but it wasn't just sort of fans of producers, it was fans in the fandom, like, encouraged by him, which was really, really interesting and not something I've seen massively in other fandoms. And I don't think if The Walking Dead hadn't become so big and the fandom hadn't become so big, he wouldn't have been able to do that. And I'm aware that I'm talking a lot because this is stuff that I could go on about for hours, so I'll stop there. But there's some really, really interesting stuff going on with sort of fandom and Walking Dead and producers and cast and everything.
Oh, it's really interesting. I only touched upon the fandom a little bit with talking about the use of Talking Dead, you know, coming on straight after every episode, and only the fans are going to hang around for another hour to watch people talking about the thing that you've just watched. And it sort of struck me of how, you know, it's quite a canny move on AMC's part, I think, to exploit the existing fan practice, because fans were going on Twitter and social media to talk about what they've just seen. So why not make a relatively cheap talk show where you just need a studio, some audience members who, you know, are all begging to be there. And then they did the same with Breaking Bad, didn't they? They had Talking Bad. So they found that doing that fan practice or exploiting it was like, you know, just a bit of extra money for not that much effort, really. Oh yeah, interesting stuff. Right then, so I'm noticing it's nearly 8 o'clock. So before we go over to questions, should we go to the fun things that we wanted to talk about, which is who's your favourite villain? I know Simon's just said Alpha. I've got Alpha written down as well, but I'm gonna say the governor, because he strikes me as the one that was truly insane, completely lost it, all gone. What about you?
I'm going to be cliche and say Negan. You know, I'm sorry, you know, it may have divided the fans, but the bat, he has a vampire bat. Of course I'm going to like Negan. But, you know, to me, that will always be the kind of key moment, is his arrival. Yes, exactly. So that's my vote.
Catherine, who's your favourite villain?
I'd have to say Negan as well. But I am a sucker for a theatrical villain. So
Yeah.
It's Batman villains. You know, it's
Right.
when the villain is, I think he was what was needed at the time as well, because there was so much build up and so much drama, and then he comes up with larger than life character and very different to the villains we'd seen before. And I absolutely love Alpha. Well, I don't love him, but I love the characterization of Alpha. But at the same time, almost all the other villains, it's kind of the banality of evil and the evil authority. And Negan just kind of came in like this rebel. And even though it was another evil authority, just coming in with that amounts of of drama, just really, yeah, he's very, very watchable. It would be interesting to see how he got from that to how he is after the 5-year jump. But actually the fact that they just went, right, so we've done with the villain bit now with him, we're going to do something different with him. I actually really respect that they just went, well, what else are we going to do? He's just going to sit in a prison otherwise. I like that he changed and they did other things, but still remained true to Negan. He didn't kind of become a good guy. He still did awful things and he acknowledged it. So, but yeah, do like a bit of theatrics.
So Simon, are you sticking with Alpha as your favourite villain?
Well, I've got to fly the flag for Samantha Morton, but couple of things. Can I have a favourite henchman? In which case, I've got to go for Simon Ogg, who was a great henchman, and I loved him, and he was always such a pleasure to kind of see. But also, just picking up on what Catherine said here and harking back to what we were talking about earlier, one of the things I think that's so great about a show like this that runs for so long is, if you go back and watch the opener of season 7, it is breathtakingly harsh. And, at the time after that build-up, it was catastrophic, apocalyptic, as an hour of television. And it's amazing that in the last episode, you were kind of going, oh, come on, Maggie. Yeah, I know he bashed his eyeball came out and stuff and it was fine. But, forgive him. And I love that. I love the fact that long-standing television like that allows your own attitude to the characters to evolve with those of the characters. It's been long enough for us that we can forgive him. And I think that's the joy. I went back after the last episode. I went back and I didn't watch the opener of season 7 because I can't watch it again. So I watched the Lego version, which is much more palatable. But it's got the original dialogue, and you just think, oh, blimey. And I love the fact that by the end, yeah, come on, it's Negan. He's all right. He still does bad things, but he's not a bad guy. And 5 years ago, he bashed somebody's head in. It's brilliant. That's the joy of long form television. That's why I love it. That and Simon Ogg.
I just love the idea of Maggie, get over it. Come on. Let it go. And Bethan, favourite villain?
I do love Negan because he is over the top, and I think, like Simon said, his redemption arc is just incredible, and I love him. But I don't know if you'd call him a villain, but I really, really, really dislike Spencer from Alexandria, because he's just a dick. Like there's nothing about him that I like, and he's just, I don't know, just like slimy and horrible and just like a little snake. So yeah, although he's not a main villain, I really don't like him.
I can tell. All right then, some more fun questions. What's your favorite's probably not the right word. Best, most affecting character death? I'm going to cheat slightly and say I've got two. The first one is when Carol shoots Lizzie. Look at the flowers, Lizzie. Look at the flowers. And then I put Sasha's suicide in the coffin to try and get Negan. Thought that was really, really affecting, and that kind of that stuck with me for a few days after the episode. So yeah, over to you guys. Best, most affecting, most traumatic death.
I'm going to jump in with an early one, and it's Dale in season 2. Dale in season 2, I sobbed. And I do think, and I was experiencing having my own experience of grief in my own life. And I think that moment was this really cathartic moment, and it was everyone standing around him. And then Daryl putting him out of his misery. And I remember sobbing, and it's just something about that moment, about them gathering as a community around him and having to now do this, and that bonding moment between Rick and Daryl, like, to me, it was really powerful, and it always stood with me as something of channeling and cathartically processing grief through that moment. So that was for me the big moment.
Simon?
Sophia, I think, has to be. That was such, and this is what I love about this show. It plodded along. It would plod along from season to season, and it would do some good stuff, and it had some dreary stuff, but it's got moments that you'll never forget. And her coming out of the barn, yeah, that really was, that was the one for me. I think it was just, but it was also narratively perfect. They spend half a season looking for her, and she's she's right there the whole time. Just wonderful. That's mine.
Catherine?
There's so many. I mean, Glenn and Abraham's one is always going to be a traumatic death, because of that build up. I mean, the very end of season 6, when you have the cliffhanger, is an incredible bit of television, and the fact that they had that long gap, and they had to build that tension back up again, and also the way they just kind of encroaching into Bethan's direction, but the way they did it in the marketing, and they had full-blown models of it that people could take photos of, and the billboards and things, absolutely incredible. And then thinking, okay, it's Abraham, we're done, and then Glenn going as well. But I think for me, one of the most traumatic was probably Beth's, because it just came out of nowhere, and it was so, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog snoring in the background, but she's fascinated by what we're doing. It was so sudden, it was so shocking. Maggie's right there, Daryl carrying her. I actually have a drawing of it just up there. But I must admit that even though they're very effective and emotional, there are some very, very funny ones, and there are some very satisfying ones. And I think I remember the satisfying ones more, and Daryl and the rocket launcher is my incredibly satisfying one. But also Rick pulling the throat out of the claimer. So I'm awful emotional deaths, but I'm just one-upping the satisfying ones.
Fair enough. God, yeah, when he tears out his throat, yeah, it's good, brilliant. Right, Bethan, best death, favourite death, however you want to call it.
I've also got two, but they are linked because they both take place at Grady Memorial Hospital. So one of them is Beth's, which, same as Catherine, it is just gutting. Like, I watched that and yeah, it's devastating. But the other one, and the one that kind of has always stuck with me, is Noah, who gets caught in the revolving doors because Nicholas is a dick. Sorry, I'm swearing quite a lot. And oh my God, like the first time I watched that, it's just so, like, there's nothing you can do about it. Like, not that you can do anything as a viewer anyway, but you can't do anything and you just have to watch, and it's horrendous. And that has always stuck with me as like probably the most effective, affective, devastating death.
Could I just add on that the most unsatisfying one for me was Tara, because there was no, like, she was such a good character and such a major character, and to kill her off with we don't even see it happen, just have that reveal was just very deflating and very unsatisfying.
Yeah, just to jump in on the Tara comment, I didn't mind that was how she went. What bothered me about that was that she was not the climactic head on the spike. That, you know, to me, that should have ended with her. Yeah. That was the horror. To have it end with the annoying teenage boy whose name I refuse to remember really made me angry, because and somebody said, no, that she's the one who you should be, you know, and because it was such a shock. So I agree, it bothered me off camera, but I think if she had been the climactic head, that would have been better.
She was done dancing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Who was that lad? The lad he was learning the stick.
The annoying child.
Wasn't it Henry? Was it?
Yes,
Henry?
it was Henry.
Far too many annoying children in the series. The little boy in Alexandria is the worst of them.
Yes.
Kill him now.
Satisfying deaths. Yeah, I'm aware we've got a few questions building up in the chat. So Stella, have you said yours though? Have you said yours?
Yeah, Sasha and Look at the Flowers. Lizzie.
Right, you did.
It's absolutely fine to shoot a little girl in the back of the house, apparently. Right, so over to questions then. So this one is coming from our Craig. He said he's happy for me to read it out. Building on the discussion of the impact of The Walking Dead had on zombie television, do the pandemic had an impact in film too? So there's the accepted truism that 28 Days Later kicked off a zombie revival in cinema in the early 2000s. Yes. Did The Walking Dead kickstart another one post 2010, do you think, in film? I don't know.
I don't know. I think it probably did. I think it was part of, I would say it's part of a landscape of zombie renaissance, using that word very intentionally. You know, I do think that it was, I don't know if I want to say there's a direct correlation, but I think that there's a lot of dialogue back and forth, because you have that shift between fast zombies and slow zombies, and The Walking Dead's a big advocate for slow zombies. So I think there's a lot of, it's part of a broader movement. I think they're all influencing each other, would be my take there. Don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts there.
I'd agree with that. I think it was just part of a smorgasbord of things, you know, video game zombies became a thing again. Fast zombies came in. You know, there was a lot going on with it.
I've got a question here from Ian, my podcast co-host. Hi, Ian. Ian says, I love Fear the Walking Dead. What do you all think about it? I watched the first 2 seasons and then I kind of stopped. so I don't know. I should watch more.
Yeah.
Others?
I can jump in. I mean, we watched the first 3 seasons, and it took me a while to get into it. I struggled for the first one, partly because that origin story, you just think it's too slow. After spending so many seasons watching The Walking Dead, watching people not know how to kill a zombie is really frustrating, because you just want to say, come on, what are you doing? Go for the brain. Exactly. But I did have to say, once I got past that, I did start getting into it, and it's one of those shows I do keep going back to, because I think as it went, I really started to enjoy the characters and like the family dynamics, although there are some annoying teenagers in that one as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here as well, because I can't remember, there was a season where they were staying in some posh hotel somewhere. And I think the show really got into its own. It must be season 3. It kind of clicked into its own at that point. But you also had, I realized that there was this young lad who was kind of a central character who just gradually got stranger and stranger. And he turned out that he played Voldemort in Harry Potter. And he was kind of a hook. That was kind of a hooking for me. But I think it was a good show. It was a good show, but it wasn't accessible. It wasn't available. You couldn't watch it. It was on some weird channel with nothing else on that you had to pay extra for. And, you know, I get totally why BT did it, you know, to kind of gather people over there. But it took me back to the bad old days of Don't Lose Lost and Get Jack Back from 24, and these kind of battles with fans to kind of get people to move over to different platforms. So I ended up buying a box set of the series, and it was the first few seasons. And then when I ran out of box set, I ran out of watching it. But I did enjoy what I saw. It took a while to get going. I think Stacey's right, but it was interesting by the time I stopped watching it.
Yeah, I'm the same. I've watched the ones that I've got on DVD, and then after that, I just didn't buy any more.
Yeah.
Any more DVDs.
Yeah.
Another question here. The discussion around changes in race and gender dynamics in the show make me wonder how it evolved with the shifting political landscape in America. So it starts in the Obama era, runs through Trump, ends with Biden. Are there themes in the show that shift with those changing politics, do you think? That's interesting.
That is interesting. I hadn't really thought of it in those specific dynamics. I think, I don't know if I can quite see those presidential correlations, but I do think the last 2 seasons with the Commonwealth and this idea of the villains now being the politicians themselves, being and the businessmen running the Commonwealth becoming the monsters, they're the villains, I think definitely correlates with the landscape we're in, where we distrust the politicians who govern, and those class issues they really bring up, and those disparity and the disinformation. I feels like that is definitely responding to the kind of climate we're in now. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about the earlier seasons. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts there.
Not so much with the earlier seasons, but some of the later seasons. I can't remember which season it is, but it's the one where they are going in like the subway tunnels, and there's a ton of graffiti on the walls, and there's a couple of pieces like specifically that seem to talk to the current like real world political climate. And I can't remember what the examples are, but I remember when I was watching it, I was a bit like, oh, that feels quite on the nose for The Walking Dead, which, you know, is a post-apocalyptic zombie TV show. So I did wonder whether they were kind of overtly making a statement kind of within the text of the show that viewers would reflect on. But yeah, I'm not sure about the earlier seasons. Same as you, Stacey.
I agree. I think the later ones had a very distrusting Trump-esque feel, particularly in terms, you know, you even get things like people invading these kind of authoritative buildings of law, and the court Eugene's court case as well. There are little tiny things seeded throughout, but I'm the same, I think. But then again, we're in terms of politics with the Biden and Obama, were they weren't as extreme, but this kind of there's, and I think as well, because we're horror people, when we see suburbia and Americana and that kind of idealistic thing, we automatically go, no, that's not right. Something's gonna happen.
Yeah, I think there might be something to be said about particularly with the Commonwealth and the way that sort of Alexandria and all the places were left when we last sort of were playing around in those places, how they were trying to get back to this very sort of idealistic version of America that is either in tandem with making America great again, or sort of an antithesis to this idea of making America great again, and maybe this notion of the potential for the utopian apocalypse where you get the chance to start again and to erase anything that, you know, that's gone particularly awry in recent years, which of course America has been turbulent, to say the least, for the past few years. But yeah, I don't know, we'll just have to watch it all again and see.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there's a question here from Pete, who says it's happy to ask the question himself. So Pete, if you want to fling your mic on and ask a question.
Hi, it's just a question regarding the Walker variants concept that came up in the final 3 or 4 episodes, you know, the ones that were picking up knives and rocks to attack people with. Just wondering what your thoughts were on that, and in particular, you know, given how long it took for such a twist on the Walker to come up in the series, do you feel more could have been made of it, for lack of a better term?
Yes. I found it so promising. With the episode where they're fighting in like a children's playground, one of the Walkers pulls the weapon out of one of the characters' hands, and that's when they start to refer to them as climbers, I think. And we'd got in like the teaser trailers for the final 8 episodes, all of the teaser trailers had the Walker hand coming over the wall, and I was like, you know, ooh, here we go, that we're going to see some more of that, and then it was barely touched upon. So I wonder if they're going to deal with that more in the spin-offs, perhaps. But I definitely wanted more sort of eye-to-eye, toe-to-toe battles between our characters and some Walkers who weren't quite as numb as the other ones.
Yeah, no, I felt the same way. I thought it was really promising, exciting, and rewatching the finale, because I watched it again before tonight. I went, oh, actually, you know, I watched the last 2 episodes actually, and you suddenly went, there are lots of little moments of them doing things, so and I really enjoyed it. I'm watching it again, so like, oh no, yeah, they're doing the climbing, and they're doing little things which I thought were very effective. And it frustrates me that I think they could have done more, and I like the idea of a variant. But what's interesting is I also, right before I watched this, I rewatched the first ever episode of The Walking Dead. And it's interesting, in the first ever episode, the zombies are a little bit different there, because the little girl picks up the teddy bear, and Morgan's wife climbs the stairs to go to the house and is fiddling with the door. So there's interesting that they kind of had those there, and I haven't rewatched the first season in quite a while, so I don't know how long that continues, or if it's just in the pilot. But you know, it's interesting that they kind of had that very Romero-esque of Night of the Living Dead, where zombies use, you know, weapons, and then kind of moved away from that. So kind of strange, but I think it's going to end up in one of the spin-offs, or all of the spin-offs.
Yeah, cool. Another comment from Ian. For me, Fear the Walking Dead is dark mirror to Walking Dead, where resolute cowboys, so Rick and Daryl, prosper in The Walking Dead, and in Fear the Walking Dead, it's drug addict Nick, moral vacuum capitalist Strand, and a Latin American torturer. I mean, that's quite an interesting point, that there may be some of the darker themes going on in Fear the Walking Dead, but I've not watched enough of it. I would have got another question. We've definitely got time, from Mary. What do you think will be the legacy of the Walking Dead finale in relation to the show overall? Some TV finales, like the final episode of Buffy, you're right there, Stacey, seem to be fairly well received, but other finales, like the Supernatural finale, has divided the show's fans. And I guess the whole last season of Game of Thrones, people were a bit unhappy. So yeah, I'll chuck that out to you guys.
I'm on the Walking Dead subreddit, and I was sort of browsing through it the other day, and I had one post that came up that was like, this was like the best finale ever, it was amazing. And the following post, which I literally swiped onto, was, this was the worst finale ever, it was rubbish. So I don't know if there's ever going to be a consensus on it, because fans are fans, and what will please some people will really piss off other people. It's I don't know. I mean, I think once we get some time and sort of rewatch the show as a whole and maybe get a bit of distance from it, we'll be able to see a bit better the sort of legacy and how the finale sort of relates to the other seasons. I watched it, like I said, just before this panel, and that was too close. So I think we need some distance. I think there's always going to be pissed off fans, particularly because The Walking Dead is such a long running show, and we've had several changes in executive producer, and some people rather the kind of Darabont style zombie, and some prefer Scott Gimple, which is also a controversial topic. So yeah, I think sort of maybe wait and see would be my answer as a kind of fan / ACCA fan.
Yeah, can't please everyone basically, can you? So yeah, someone's always going to moan about it.
Yeah.
Always going to moan. Do we have anything else to add to that, or should we go, Stacey?
No, I think we can go to the next one. I mean, unless anyone else is burning, but just to respond to that one. Oh, Simon's got something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, picking up on what Bethan was saying there, I think time will, in the long term, looking back, people will not see this as the end of anything. This is the end of this strand of something, and it's a soft ending because everything we've been talking about, the what are dexterous zombies or whatever we want to call them, the climbers, they're going to come back somewhere else. I think the finale of this season of The Walking Dead is going to be a bridge to whatever come next. And in some ways that makes total sense, and that's good because it means that there's more Walking Dead to come. In another, and it also mitigates against, the haters or the lovers. But I think there's also a little bit sad that I think in years to come, we'll look back on this last episode of an 11 season run and go, oh yeah, but that was just really kind of setting up this one and that one. But it does mean that more of the characters lived. So yay, Gaynor, good luck for that. I'm happy with that one.
Yeah.
Right. Craig has a random question. Has Robert Kirkman said much about the show over the years? Is he a fan? I wonder how much liberty it takes with the source material and whether he's happy about it or not. I was under the impression that Robert Kirkman had a fairly solid amount to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't followed him in a while, but my understanding he was fairly involved in the show, and I assume still is.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Years on the Talking Dead and all the stuff, and I think he doesn't have a problem with the liberties. They have taken liberties, extensive liberties with the source text, but he's always been quite happy about that. In what I've experienced, that he is sort of seeing his graphic novel as one thing, as this is a different type of storytelling. Not everyone shares his happiness with the liberties that have been taken with it, but I think he's always just accepted it is what it is, and this is its own thing. And it's funny because as you asked it, Craig, I thought actually I haven't seen him interview in a while, so I'm assuming he's has still been involved, but he was for a long time. So I think it's just another string to his universe that he's created.
Yeah. Well, fair play to him. He's done all right out of it, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure he sold a lot of graphic novels on the heels of the series. So,
all right then. So I think we're about coming to the end. I just had one final question for you all, before we wrap this up, and I just wanted to know what have been your favourite hero walkers or walkers of the week. You always get one a week that's that one for that week. Which's been your one of the ones that stuck in your mind? What do you reckon? I would say, I mean, I've written down Bicycle Girl because she's iconic. That that first one that we see. But for me, there's one It's when they go back into Atlanta to go and get Beth, I believe, and there's some that are kind of melted into the asphalt because of the napalm drops. Like that was written. Daryl's just stepping over them like they were cracking the road. Doesn't care.
Yeah, it's funny. That's what I was thinking as well. I was called them the melty zombies. They're great. They all a bit of a blur, but to me, there's so many. But I sort of remember. Actually, no, I would say one of my favorites were Michonne's 2 zombies on chains that she had walking before her with their jaws removed, and they were so brilliant to look at. And what an entrance for Michonne as a character, you know, with these 2 walkers. So they stand out for me.
Yeah. And Simon, favorite walker?
Yikes, I have no idea. The Johnny Depp on the head of a car. I think Johnny Depp turned up at one point on the head of a car. That's the one that I always remember going, oh, it's Johnny Depp. And Freddy Krueger turned up this season as well. Yeah. But the only other ones I remember are the melty ones on the asphalt. So yeah, I'm going for my favorite zombie is Johnny Depp.
Catherine?
I can tell you my least favorite, which is the one in the well, because it's just so disgusting. I think because I'm the same, they all kind of blur together, but when you see characters that we've loved coming back as zombies or walkers even, it is that always stays with me, and in particular Sophia, and of course the governor's daughter as well. There's something about a child, and with in this series just gone with Maggie with the little lad as well. But Sophia, I think that was such a shock, and it was something that I think everyone kind of went, but again, they're breaking these rules of horror. The child must survive, and it's like, so
yeah,
that's what I go for.
Bethan?
Teddy Bear Girl. She's definitely my favorite, because she's the first child zombie that we see, and you know, she picks up that teddy bear and then turns, and Rick sees her, and it's just like, whoa. So yeah, that always sticks with me, that one.
And then she gets shot in the face.
Yes.
All right, I think
there began everything.
And here we are 400 years later. So I think that's about it. I want to thank you all so much for agreeing to share this therapy session with me to deal with the end of it. Maybe we'll come back in 10 years' time if it's still all going. But cheers to The Walking Dead, and cheers to all the cast, all the crew, for making it be a wonderful, if traumatic, 12 years.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing with us. Absolutely. And I guess we want to invite Craig back to say some closing remarks.